A moving truck blocked the quiet suburban street as Ronald smiled and handed a house key to Vanessa Brooks. In front of neighbors, delivery workers, and curious onlookers, he pointed at Courtney Green and calmly told her to leave his home before sunset. Vanessa walked through the front door as though she had already inherited the place, instructing movers where to put her belongings. Courtney never argued. She simply watched every face, every camera, and every careless word. None of them knew the simplest fact in the entire neighborhood. The only legal owner of that house was the silent woman they believed had just been thrown out. If you believe dignity is measured by how someone responds when power is abused, share your country and your local time in the comments. And if stories where truth quietly defeats arrogance speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. Long before anyone on that quiet street whispered about betrayal, before a moving truck became the center of neighborhood gossip, the truth had already been written into county records, trust agreements, and signatures preserved inside a law office safe. Those papers would never raise their voices. They would never argue. But when the right day arrived, they would speak more clearly than any witness ever could. Courtney Green had always believed that silence was not the absence of strength. Sometimes it was simply strength waiting for its proper moment. At 36, Courtney carried herself with an unassuming grace that made strangers underestimate her. She preferred neutral-colored sweaters, practical shoes, and notebooks with neatly dated pages. While others relied on memory, Courtney relied on records. She wrote down conversations that seemed important, saved receipts long after most people would have thrown them away, and filed documents with a precision that came from years of watching her parents manage family affairs. She had never imagined those habits would one day become the foundation of her survival. Her marriage to Ronald had once looked ordinary from the outside. Friends remembered the early years as warm and hopeful. Ronald was charming, ambitious, and remarkably persuasive. He knew how to make people feel important. He could enter a room full of strangers and leave with future clients' business contacts and invitations to dinner. Courtney admired that confidence. She was quieter, more thoughtful, and content to let Ronald enjoy the spotlight while she handled the details of everyday life. For nearly 8 years, their differences appeared to complement one another. At least, that was how everyone else described them. The narrator knew something different. Confidence built on admiration can slowly become dependence. And dependence on admiration often grows into entitlement without announcing itself. Ronald's career in commercial construction had improved steadily over the years. Promotions became larger contracts. Larger contracts became management responsibilities. His income increased along with the attention he received from colleagues. Compliments slowly became expectations. Expectations quietly became pride. Pride eventually convinced Ronald that everything surrounding his success existed because of him. The house became part of that illusion. Visitors often congratulated him. "You've done well for yourself. This place is incredible. You must be proud." Ronald never corrected them. He smiled. He accepted every compliment. Over time, he stopped thinking of the property as something the couple simply lived in. He began thinking of it as proof of his own achievements. Courtney noticed the change long before anyone else. She noticed the way Ronald referred to the home. "My house. My investment. My property." Each word was small enough to ignore on its own. Together they formed a pattern. Courtney never argued about those words. She simply remembered them. Unknown to Ronald, the history of the property reached back years before they had exchanged wedding vows. After Courtney's parents died within 18 months of one another, the family estate had been reorganized according to a carefully prepared trust. Her parents had spent decades building modest but valuable real estate investments, believing wealth should protect future generations rather than impress strangers. Their attorney had advised placing certain assets inside a family trust. The largest of those assets was the elegant suburban home where Courtney and Ronald now lived. Although Courtney became the sole beneficiary, the ownership structure remained inside the trust instead of appearing in the simple manner Ronald assumed. The legal arrangement protected the property from unnecessary financial exposure lawsuits unrelated to the trust and several other risks her parents had carefully anticipated. Every detail had been reviewed by attorney Benjamin Carter. Benjamin had represented the Green family for more than 25 years. He understood every signature, every amendment, every filing, every page. He also understood something Courtney herself occasionally forgot. Paper never cared about emotion. It only cared about truth. During the first years of marriage, Ronald showed little interest in legal documents. Whenever Courtney mentioned estate paperwork, he laughed politely. "I trust you," he would say while waving away another folder. "No need to bore me with legal language." Courtney accepted that answer. She never imagined indifference could later become dangerous. Benjamin had encouraged her several times to review the trust with Ronald in detail. Each conversation ended the same way. Ronald claimed he was too busy. There would always be another weekend, another month, another opportunity. Eventually, nobody mentioned it again. Years passed. Life became comfortable. Then comfortable became routine. Routine slowly became distance. Around the same time, Ronald accepted a senior leadership position with his company. A new marketing coordinator joined the office. Her name was Vanessa Brooks. She was 29 years old, intelligent, ambitious, and naturally charismatic. Unlike Courtney, Vanessa enjoyed attention. She dressed confidently, spoke confidently, and entered every conversation, believing she belonged at the center of it. She admired successful men. Ronald admired admiration itself. The attraction between them developed gradually. Late meetings, business dinners, conferences that lasted a little longer than necessary, messages that became increasingly personal. None of those moments alone destroyed a marriage. Together, they built another pattern. Courtney noticed that pattern too. She never searched through Ronald's phone. She never followed him. She never hired investigators. She simply paid attention. Receipts appeared for restaurants Ronald had claimed never to visit. Calendar entries quietly disappeared. Weekend meetings multiplied. Laundry occasionally carried unfamiliar perfume. Courtney recorded dates in a small notebook she kept inside her desk drawer. Not accusations, not conclusions, only facts. Date, time, observation, nothing more. Benjamin had once told her something she never forgot. Facts become evidence because they refuse to exaggerate. She lived by those words. Across the street lived Margaret Ellis, a retired elementary school principal who had occupied the same home for nearly 30 years. Margaret noticed nearly everything happening on the block. Not because she enjoyed gossip, because decades of supervising children had taught her to recognize unusual behavior before other adults did. She saw Ronald arriving home later than usual. She noticed unfamiliar vehicles. She noticed Courtney spending more evenings tending flowers alone in the front yard. Margaret sensed something changing. She simply hoped she was wrong. Courtney continued maintaining the home with the same care she always had. Insurance renewals, property tax reminders, maintenance appointments, roof inspections, heating service, landscaping invoices. Every major payment came from accounts established long before her marriage. Every receipt entered carefully labeled folders. Ronald barely glanced at any of it. Why would he? He believed ownership required confidence more than documentation. That misunderstanding would eventually cost him almost everything. One Friday afternoon, several months after Vanessa entered Ronald's life, Courtney returned home earlier than expected. Ronald was in his home office. His voice carried through the partially open door. He did not know she was already inside. "I'll make room," he said quietly into his phone. There was a brief pause. "No, don't worry about the house." Another pause. "You'll be living here sooner than you think." Courtney stood silently in the hallway. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She didn't confront him. She simply looked at the family photographs hanging along the wall before walking upstairs without making a sound. Later that evening, Ronald behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. Courtney behaved exactly the same, but after he fell asleep, she opened the small notebook inside her bedside drawer. She wrote one sentence beneath the day's date. Ronald promised someone she would soon be living in this house. She closed the notebook, turned off the bedside lamp, and quietly waited. Neither Ronald nor Vanessa understood that the home they were already planning to share had never belonged to Ronald in the first place. The law already knew the truth. It was only waiting for the people involved to discover it. Morning arrived with the kind of quiet that often exists just before something irreversible happens. The neighborhood looked ordinary. Children waited for school buses. Dogs barked behind white picket fences. Garden sprinklers swept neat arcs across green lawns. Nothing suggested that before the afternoon was over, one household would become the subject of whispered conversations throughout the entire subdivision. Courtney Green left for work just after 8, carrying the same leather portfolio she had used for years. Before pulling out of the driveway, she paused for a moment and glanced toward the house. It looked exactly as it always had. Neatly trimmed hedges, blue shutters, the maple tree her father had planted decades earlier, the front porch where her mother used to drink coffee every Sunday morning. Every brick carried memories Ronald had never fully understood because he had arrived long after those memories were created. To him, it was an attractive house. To Courtney, it was the last physical piece of her parents that still existed. That difference mattered. It mattered more than anyone yet realized. Ronald barely waited until Courtney's car disappeared around the corner. He looked at his phone. A message from Vanessa Brooks appeared almost immediately. "Leaving now. Movers are 10 minutes behind me." Ronald smiled. He answered with only 3 words. "Everything is ready." He believed he was beginning a new chapter. The narrator already knew he was ending one. Shortly after noon, a large moving truck rolled into the quiet street. Its bright company logo caught the attention of nearly every nearby homeowner. Margaret Ellis happened to be watering flowers beside her mailbox. She frowned. She had not heard anyone mention moving. A black SUV pulled in behind the truck. Vanessa stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a confident smile. She looked around the neighborhood with the expression of someone inspecting property she already owned. Ronald walked outside carrying a spare house key. Without hesitation, he placed it into Vanessa's hand. "Welcome home," he said. The movers smiled politely. To them, it was another ordinary job. None of them knew they had just become witnesses. Inside the house, Ronald walked Vanessa from room to room. "This will be your office." She nodded approvingly. "And the primary bedroom." "Our bedroom," Ronald corrected. Vanessa laughed. "I like the sound of that." She opened the bedroom closet. "There isn't enough space." Ronald shrugged. "We'll clear it out." Vanessa ran her fingers across Courtney's neatly organized clothing. "So, these all disappear today," Ronald answered without hesitation. "They're only clothes." Those 4 words echoed longer than he intended. Not because anyone argued with them, because one of the movers quietly looked away. The young man had spent years helping families relocate. He recognized awkward silence when he heard it. Still, he continued working. His responsibility was carrying boxes, not judging marriages. Vanessa walked into the kitchen. She immediately began imagining changes. The cabinets should be white. Ronald nodded. We'll renovate. The dining room lighting feels old. We'll replace it. The living room furniture. Vanessa wrinkled her nose. It doesn't feel like us. Ronald laughed. It soon will. Neither of them noticed that nearly every major renovation they discussed would later become additional evidence regarding unauthorized alterations to property they did not legally own. The law often remembers conversations people quickly forget. Margaret watched quietly from across the street. She saw furniture being unloaded, suitcases, designer handbags, artwork, several expensive clothing boxes. She finally crossed the street. Good afternoon, she called politely. Ronald smiled. Afternoon, Margaret. I didn't realize someone was moving. Vanessa answered before Ronald could. I'll be living here now. Margaret looked briefly toward Ronald, then toward the open front door, then back again. I see. Years of experience teaching children had taught Margaret something valuable. When adults stop explaining obvious situations, something usually isn't obvious at all. She politely excused herself. But she did not stop watching. At approximately 3:15 that afternoon, Courtney returned home earlier than expected. A client meeting had been canceled. As she turned onto her street, she immediately noticed the moving truck. Her eyes settled on the open garage. Several unfamiliar boxes already lined the walls. She parked across the street instead of in the driveway. She sat quietly for nearly 30 seconds. Not because she was afraid, because she preferred understanding a situation before entering it. She noticed the company logo on the truck. She memorized the license plate. She observed 3 movers, 1 supervisor, time, weather, date. Then she stepped out of her car. Ronald noticed her almost immediately. Instead of appearing nervous, he seemed relieved. Perfect timing. Courtney walked toward him calmly. What's happening? Ronald folded his arms. Vanessa's moving in. The sentence was delivered with astonishing simplicity, as though he were announcing new furniture instead of dismantling a marriage. Courtney looked toward the open doorway. Vanessa appeared carrying several shopping bags. She smiled pleasantly, not kindly, confidently. So, you're Courtney? Courtney nodded once. Vanessa extended no hand. I've heard a lot about you. Courtney answered softly. I imagine you have. Nothing more, no shouting, no accusations, only silence. Sometimes silence unsettles guilty people more effectively than anger. Ronald misread it completely. I think it's better if you pack your things. Courtney looked directly at him. My things. You'll need somewhere else to stay. Vanessa leaned casually against the doorway. It'll be easier for everyone. Courtney glanced slowly around the front yard. Several neighbors had quietly emerged from nearby homes, not close enough to interfere, close enough to witness. She noticed delivery workers, 2 landscapers working nearby, Margaret standing beside her roses. She noticed 3 visible exterior security cameras mounted beneath the roofline. One belonged to her own house. Another belonged to Margaret. A third faced the street from the home across the corner. She mentally noted all 3. Without raising her voice, Courtney asked one question. When did you decide this? Ronald sighed dramatically. It's been over for a long time. Vanessa folded her arms, smiling faintly. You deserve someone who actually wants to be with you. Courtney did not respond. Instead, she looked toward the movers. What company are you with? The supervisor answered automatically. Evergreen Moving Services, ma'am. She nodded. Thank you. The supervisor found the question unusual. Only later would he understand why she had asked. Inside the house, Vanessa had already begun rearranging furniture. Photographs disappeared from shelves. Decorations Courtney's mother had chosen years earlier were stacked carelessly inside cardboard boxes. A framed family portrait rested against a wall. One mover accidentally knocked it over. The glass cracked loudly. Courtney instinctively stepped forward. She gently picked up the photograph. Her parents smiled back at her from another lifetime. She brushed a few tiny pieces of glass from the frame, then carefully placed it inside a separate box marked fragile. No one spoke. Even Ronald avoided looking at the picture. Vanessa entered the living room carrying a measuring tape. "I think we'll put a piano over there." Ronald laughed. "Whatever you want." Courtney quietly noticed another detail. Vanessa had already begun referring to the house as we. Not once had either of them used the word legal. Confidence often replaces caution when people assume they cannot be questioned. Courtney slowly walked upstairs. She entered the master bedroom, opened the closet. Several empty hangers already swayed gently where her dresses had once been. She crossed the room without emotion. Inside the walk-in closet stood a built-in safe hidden behind hanging coats. She entered the combination. The steel door opened. Inside rested several carefully organized document folders. Family trust, original warranty deed, county recording certificate, property tax history, title insurance policy, estate amendments, certified copies. She removed each folder one by one, closed the safe, locked it again. As she carried the documents downstairs, Ronald barely looked up. He assumed she was collecting personal belongings. He had no idea she was carrying the single collection of papers capable of ending every illusion he had spent years building. Courtney walked calmly out the front door. She placed the folders carefully inside her car. Then she looked back at the house one final time before driving away. She did not know exactly how long the legal process would take. She knew only one thing with complete certainty. She would never need to argue about who owned that home. The documents already knew. And very soon, everyone else would too. Courtney Green did not drive aimlessly after leaving the house. She drove with purpose. The folders resting on the passenger seat were secured with a leather strap her father had once used to transport important documents. Every stoplight seemed unusually long, but she never exceeded the speed limit. She refused to allow emotion to rush decisions that might later become legal evidence. By the time she reached downtown, the afternoon sun reflected from the glass towers surrounding Benjamin Carter's law office. The building itself looked unremarkable compared to newer corporate skyscrapers. Benjamin preferred it that way. He often joked that clients paid him for preparation, not impressive architecture. Courtney stepped inside carrying the folders. The receptionist immediately recognized her. "Good afternoon, Miss Green." "Good afternoon, Emily. Is Benjamin available?" Emily looked toward the hallway. "He just finished with another client. I'll let him know you're here." Less than a minute later, Benjamin Carter appeared. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had spent 4 decades watching emotional conflicts become legal files. The moment he saw the folders in Courtney's hands, his expression changed slightly. "You brought everything. I thought it was time." He nodded once. "I was hoping I was wrong." Neither of them needed to explain what that meant. Benjamin led Courtney into the conference room where countless Green family documents had been reviewed over the years. The same walnut table, the same framed county maps, the same locked filing cabinets. Some rooms become part of a family's history without anyone intending them to. Benjamin waited until Courtney sat down. "Tell me everything." She did. Not dramatically, not emotionally, only chronologically. She described Ronald's phone conversation from several weeks earlier. She described the moving truck, Vanessa Brooks carrying suitcases through the front door, the comments made in front of neighbors, the instruction that she leave the house, the movers, the broken family photograph, the changing of furniture. Every event came with a date, a time, a location. Whenever Benjamin interrupted, it was only to clarify details. What exact words did Ronald use? He told me, "You'll need somewhere else to stay." Benjamin wrote it down. What did Vanessa say? "It'll be easier for everyone." Another note. Did either of them physically threaten you? No. Did anyone witness the conversation? Several neighbors, 3 movers. Margaret Ellis was across the street. Benjamin underlined Margaret's name. Witnesses matter. Courtney quietly nodded. She had expected him to say exactly that. When she finished, Benjamin leaned back in his chair. Then he opened the first folder. Inside rested the original warranty deed. Cream-colored paper, county seal, original recording information. He examined it carefully before placing it beside the family trust agreement. Next came the trust amendments, the title insurance policy, property tax receipts, annual insurance renewals, maintenance contracts. Everything had been preserved exactly as Courtney's parents had taught her. Benjamin looked up. "You kept every major document. My father always said paperwork grows more valuable with time." He was absolutely right. Benjamin reached for another folder. "This," he said, tapping the deed gently, "is still exactly what it was the day your parents signed it." Courtney remained silent. Benjamin continued. "Ronald's name has never appeared anywhere in the chain of title." He opened another document. "Not here." Another page. "Not here." Another. And certainly not here. The legal history stretched back decades. Every transfer, every amendment, every recording, every page pointed toward one conclusion. Courtney Green remained the sole legal owner. Benjamin finally folded his hands together. "I believe Ronald has spent years assuming possession equals ownership." Courtney looked toward the window. "He calls it his house now." Benjamin sighed quietly. People often confuse living somewhere with owning it. He paused. The law does not. For nearly an hour, they reviewed every document individually. Benjamin explained each one carefully. The warranty deed established ownership. The family trust protected the asset. The trust amendment confirmed Courtney remained the sole beneficiary. The county recording history showed no transfer had ever occurred. The title insurance policy remained continuously active. Property tax records listed the trust as owner. Insurance renewals had always identified Courtney as the insured party responsible for the residence. Benjamin pointed toward another folder. "Show me your payment history." Courtney handed him neatly organized bank statements. Every major property expense appeared. Roof replacement, foundation inspection, heating system replacement, storm damage repairs, property taxes, insurance premiums, landscape restoration. The payments stretched across years. Benjamin smiled faintly. "I hoped you'd have these." "I keep everything." "I know." He turned several more pages. "The account belongs solely to you." "Yes." "No transfers from Ronald covering these expenses." "None." Benjamin wrote another note. "Excellent." The word sounded strange considering the circumstances. Courtney noticed. "It doesn't feel excellent." "No," Benjamin answered honestly. "But legally, clarity is always preferable to confusion." He stood and walked toward a locked filing cabinet. Using a small key, He removed an older file labeled Green Family Trust. Inside rested original certified copies retained by his office. He placed them beside Courtney's documents. Now we compare. One by one, every signature matched. Every recording number matched. Every legal description matched. Nothing had changed. Benjamin looked satisfied. I don't see a single inconsistency. Courtney exhaled slowly. She had not realized she had been holding her breath. Benjamin returned to his chair. The next step is straightforward. He began outlining the process. First, they would obtain updated certified copies directly from the county recorder. Second, they would request a current title report confirming ownership remained unchanged. Third, they would prepare a formal demand letter. Fourth, if Ronald refused to comply, litigation would begin immediately. Courtney listened carefully. I don't want revenge. Benjamin nodded. I know. I just want my home. And that distinction will matter. He looked directly at her. Courts recognize people seeking restoration differently from people seeking retaliation. Courtney appreciated the sentence more than he realized. She had no interest in humiliating Ronald publicly. She simply refused to surrender what legally belonged to her family. Benjamin reached for another legal pad. There is something else. Courtney waited. Did Ronald make renovations recently? He mentioned plans. Has any work begun? Not yet. Benjamin made another note. If he authorizes structural changes while lacking ownership authority, that creates additional legal complications. Courtney remembered Vanessa discussing kitchen cabinets, lighting, furniture, wall colors. She quietly described those conversations. Benjamin listened carefully. They're planning to behave as though ownership is already transferred. It hasn't. No. He smiled slightly. And the county records agree with you. Late that afternoon, Emily entered carrying fresh coffee. She placed 2 cups on the table before leaving again. Benjamin stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. Then he spoke more softly than before. Courtney. Yes. I'm going to ask something difficult. She nodded. Do you want Ronald warned immediately? She considered the question for several seconds. Finally, she answered. If he already believes the house is his. Benjamin waited. Then warning him won't change what he believes. Benjamin slowly smiled. It may even encourage him to destroy evidence. She nodded once. I thought the same. Benjamin closed every folder carefully. Then he locked them inside his office safe. Only one certified copy remained on the table. He slid it toward Courtney. Keep this. She accepted it. Tomorrow morning I'll request updated certified records from the county. And after that, we prepare. Courtney stood, so we wait. Benjamin looked directly at her. No. He shook his head gently. We don't wait. He paused before finishing the sentence. We let them continue believing a lie they cannot legally defend. Courtney understood exactly what he meant. Across town, Ronald and Vanessa spent the evening discussing furniture catalogs, paint colors, and vacation plans for what they proudly called their future together. They laughed inside a house Ronald believed belonged to him. Neither of them realized that less than 24 hours after Courtney quietly walked away, the legal process that would dismantle every one of their assumptions had already begun. The truth had not become stronger that day. It had always been strong. It had simply found an attorney willing to place it in the proper order. The following week settled into an uneasy routine. From the outside, Ronald's life appeared to improve. From the inside, he was becoming increasingly careless. Confidence has a peculiar way of changing people's habits. Those who believe they will never be questioned often stop measuring their words. They assume certainty is the same as truth. Ronald had reached that stage without realizing it. Every morning, he left the house beside Vanessa Brooks. They drove to work together. They stopped for coffee together. By evening, they returned together, laughing as though the previous 8 years of marriage had quietly erased themselves. The neighbors noticed. Few commented. People often avoid stepping into another family's private affairs, even when those affairs are unfolding in plain sight. Margaret Ellis, however, continued paying attention. She never watched out of curiosity. She watched because she had lived long enough to recognize when silence was hiding something important. One Tuesday afternoon, she noticed a delivery truck bringing expensive furniture. 2 leather chairs, a glass dining table, several oversized mirrors. Vanessa stood on the porch directing every delivery. "No," she said confidently. "The sofa belongs against that wall." She pointed toward the living room and moved the old cabinet into storage. The delivery workers followed instructions without hesitation. None of them knew that the woman giving orders had no legal authority over the property. Inside the house, Ronald admired the changes. "It already feels different." Vanessa smiled. "It finally feels like our home." Those words would later become unexpectedly important. Security cameras positioned near the front entrance captured every arrival and every delivery. Each recording was automatically stored in cloud storage associated with the property's original security account. Ronald had never changed the account ownership. He assumed changing passwords was enough. He never realized the registered account holder remained Courtney Green. Every recorded video continued uploading exactly where it always had. Courtney never mentioned it. Benjamin never advised her to. Sometimes the strongest evidence collects itself. Courtney spent the week living quietly in a small business hotel 15 minutes away. The room was modest. A desk, a bed, a single armchair near the window. Every evening she returned from work, ordered simple takeout, and opened her notebook. She never wrote emotional reflections. Instead, every page looked almost identical. Monday, 6:42 p.m. Observed delivery truck at residence. Company logo photographed. Tuesday, 2:18 p.m. Furniture delivered. Video saved. Wednesday, 8:06 a.m. Ronald and Vanessa departed together, neighbor Margaret observed. She wrote only facts. Benjamin had reviewed her notebook once and smiled. This is exactly how evidence should look. No opinions, no assumptions, only events. Meanwhile, Ronald continued speaking carelessly. At work, he rarely tried to hide his relationship with Vanessa anymore. During lunch one afternoon, several co-workers congratulated him on starting over. Ronald accepted the congratulations with visible pride. "My life is finally uncomplicated." One co-worker asked cautiously, "Everything's settled with your wife?" Ronald laughed. "She'll figure things out." Another asked, "The house situation isn't going to become a problem?" Ronald leaned back in his chair. "What problem?" He smiled confidently. "It's my house." Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We're already redecorating." Several co-workers exchanged uncertain glances. No one challenged him, but 2 of them remembered the conversation. The narrator knew they would remember it even more clearly months later. Confidence spoken aloud often creates witnesses. That same evening, Ronald invited 3 friends to the house for dinner. The gathering seemed casual. Steaks on the grill, cold drinks, baseball playing on the television, ordinary conversations. Then one guest complimented the house. "You really landed on your feet." Ronald grinned. "I always intended to keep the place." Another friend looked around. Did Courtney move everything out? Not everything, Ronald answered. We're getting rid of the rest, little by little. Vanessa laughed. There was so much unnecessary stuff. The men laughed politely. None of them noticed Margaret quietly gardening across the street. She heard enough to understand the direction things were taking. She also noticed Ronald repeatedly referring to the property as his own. That detail remained in her memory. Later, it would become part of a sworn witness statement. On Thursday afternoon, Courtney met Benjamin again. He placed several certified documents across the conference table. The county responded quickly. She carefully examined the papers. Every seal was official. Every recording number matched the originals. Nothing had changed. Benjamin summarized the results. The title remains exactly where it has always been. He handed her the updated title report. Sole ownership remains with the Green Family Trust. Courtney looked relieved, not because she had doubted the documents, because certainty removes unnecessary fear. Benjamin continued. I've also reviewed the homeowner's insurance. What did you find? You remain the named insured. And Ronald? He is listed only as an additional resident during the marriage. She remained quiet. Benjamin reached for another folder. The property taxes. Still paid from my account. Correct. He opened another page. The mortgage? There isn't one. Benjamin nodded. Exactly. The house had been paid in full years before Ronald ever moved into it. That fact eliminated one of the most common legal arguments involving marital property. Benjamin folded his hands. I've drafted the demand letter. He slid it toward Courtney. She read every paragraph carefully. The language remained professional. No threats, no insults, only facts. The letter formally notified Ronald that he was occupying property owned by the Green Family Trust. It demanded that he immediately cease excluding the legal owner from the residence. It instructed him not to remove, destroy, alter, or transfer any property inside the home. It requested written confirmation within 10 business days. Courtney looked up. It's fair. Benjamin smiled. It is intentionally fair. I don't want him humiliated. I know. I just want him to stop pretending. Benjamin nodded. The court will notice that. The following morning, the demand letter was sent by certified mail with return receipt requested. Benjamin also arranged personal service through a licensed process server if delivery became necessary. Everything followed procedure. Everything created records. Everything left a paper trail. Late Friday afternoon, the certified envelope arrived at the house. Vanessa answered the door. The postal employee asked, "Is Ronald available to sign?" She called him. Ronald walked over, glanced at the law firm's name on the envelope, and laughed. A lawyer. He signed without concern. After the mail carrier left, Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter. What is it? Ronald opened the envelope. He skimmed the first page for barely 20 seconds. Then he tossed it onto the counter. Nothing. Vanessa picked it up. What does it say? My wife hired an attorney. She looked uncertain. Should you read it? I already know what it says. You didn't finish reading. I don't need to. He poured himself a drink. It's just an attempt to scare me. Vanessa hesitated. It mentions ownership. Ronald waved dismissively. Legal language. It says the property belongs to... I said it's meaningless. His voice became noticeably sharper. Vanessa quietly placed the letter back on the counter. She chose not to continue the conversation. The envelope remained exactly where Ronald had thrown it. Neither of them realized they had just ignored the first formal opportunity to resolve the dispute peacefully. Across town, Benjamin received electronic confirmation that the certified letter had been delivered and signed. He printed the confirmation and added it to the growing file. Courtney watched him place the receipt behind the demand letter. Another document, another date, another fact. She asked softly, "Do you think he'll respond?" Benjamin looked at the signed delivery confirmation before answering. "No." He closed the file carefully. "I think he'll make the mistake of believing confidence is stronger than documentation." Courtney lowered her eyes for a moment. She no longer felt angry, she simply felt certain. And certainty, unlike arrogance, required no raised voice. Part 6. The certified letter remained unopened on the kitchen counter for nearly 2 days. Not because Ronald had forgotten about it, because ignoring it made him feel powerful. Each time he walked past the envelope bearing Benjamin Carter's law firm's letterhead, he smiled to himself. In his mind, attorneys became involved only when people lacked confidence. Ronald believed confidence alone could settle almost anything. The narrator knew the law had never shared that opinion. By Monday morning, Vanessa Brooks finally picked up the envelope again. "You really aren't going to answer?" Ronald looked up from his coffee. "I already answered. You never wrote anything." "I don't need to." She unfolded the first page once more. "It says you're preventing the legal owner from accessing the property." Ronald laughed. "That's exactly why lawyers make money." Vanessa frowned. "What if Courtney actually believes she owns the house?" Ronald shrugged. "People believe all kinds of things." "But—" He interrupted before she could finish. "I've lived here for years. We're married. I've paid bills. I've made improvements. Trust me." Vanessa wanted to believe him. Trusting Ronald required less effort than questioning him. So she folded the letter and returned it to the counter. Neither of them contacted Benjamin. Neither of them contacted Courtney. Silence became their answer. Benjamin expected exactly that. Late that afternoon, Courtney returned to his office after work. Benjamin handed her a fresh folder. The delivery receipt. She examined the certified signature. Ronald had personally signed for the demand letter. Date, time, tracking number, everything was officially documented. "So he can't claim he never received it?" Benjamin smiled slightly. "Exactly." He opened another folder. "I've already prepared the next step." Courtney looked toward him. "What happens now?" "If Ronald continues excluding you from the property, we'll proceed with formal litigation." He paused. "But first—" Benjamin slid another document across the table. "This is a notice of unauthorized occupancy." Courtney read every line carefully. Unlike the demand letter, this document explained the legal consequences of remaining inside property after receiving notice from the lawful owner. Again, the language remained professional. No emotional accusations, only legal facts. Benjamin noticed Courtney studying each paragraph. "You always read everything." "My father insisted on it." "He gave you excellent advice." Courtney quietly signed several authorization forms, allowing Benjamin to act on her behalf regarding the property dispute. When she finished, Benjamin carefully organized every page. "Now," he said, "there's something else I'd like to verify." He opened several banking records Courtney had previously provided. "Let's walk through every significant payment." One by one, they reviewed years of financial history, annual property taxes, insurance premiums, major plumbing repairs, roof replacement after a severe storm, foundation inspection, heating system replacement, electrical upgrades, Every payment originated from Courtney's personal account or directly from the family trust. Benjamin highlighted several transactions. These are especially important. Why? They demonstrate continuous financial responsibility. He looked directly at Courtney. Ownership isn't determined by who replaces light bulbs. She smiled faintly. It's determined by legal title and by conduct consistent with ownership. Benjamin tapped another page. You've consistently maintained both. Courtney had never viewed those payments as strategic. She simply believed homeowners paid their responsibilities. Only now did she understand how ordinary habits could later become extraordinary evidence. Meanwhile, Ronald spent the week making expensive decisions inside the house. Vanessa had convinced him the kitchen needed complete remodeling. We should replace everything. The cabinets. All of them. The countertops. Quartz. The appliances. Professional grade. Ronald barely hesitated. If that's what you want. He contacted a renovation company the following morning. A project manager arrived Thursday afternoon. The man introduced himself as Daniel Morris. He carried measuring equipment and renovation catalogs. Ronald welcomed him enthusiastically. We're thinking about a complete redesign. Daniel began taking measurements. Halfway through the consultation, he asked a routine question. Are both property owners approving the renovation? Ronald answered immediately. I'm the owner. Daniel nodded. No problem. He made a brief note. What name should appear on the contract? Ronald. Last name, Ronald provided it confidently. Daniel continued writing. No one corrected him. Yet the narrator understood something Daniel could not. That contract, if signed, would later become another document inside Benjamin's growing evidence file. Legal disputes often become stronger because people continue creating paperwork after receiving warnings. On Friday evening, Margaret Ellis noticed another unusual event. A locksmith's van parked outside the house. She watched from her front porch. The locksmith carried several tool cases toward the entrance. Margaret crossed the street, not to interfere, simply to ask a question. Good evening. The locksmith smiled politely. Evening. Everything all right? Just changing locks. Margaret looked toward Ronald. Renovating, Ronald answered casually. Fresh start? Margaret's expression remained neutral. I see. She returned home without another word. But she quietly noted the company name printed on the locksmith's van. Old teachers develop remarkable memories. Inside the house, the locksmith replaced every exterior lock. Front door, garage entry, side entrance, back patio. When the work finished, Ronald accepted a small envelope containing new keys. Vanessa smiled. No more unexpected visitors. Ronald slipped the keys into his pocket. Exactly. Neither of them realized something important. Changing locks does not change ownership. It merely changes hardware. The law recognizes the difference. Late that night, Ronald sent Courtney a brief text message. Don't come back. You no longer have access here. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. Courtney read the message while sitting inside her hotel room. She did not reply. Instead, she took a screenshot, saved it in 2 locations, forwarded a copy to Benjamin, then opened her notebook. Friday, 9:42 p.m. Received text stating I no longer have access to residence. Screenshot saved, no response sent. She closed the notebook. Her breathing remained steady. The message hurt. Not because she feared losing the house. She already knew the law protected her ownership. It hurt because the man she had once trusted believed excluding her from her childhood home was an acceptable way to begin another relationship. The emotional wound existed separately from the legal dispute. Benjamin called the following morning. I received the screenshot. Yes. Excellent. She smiled softly. I don't think anyone has ever called that word excellent before. Benjamin chuckled. I understand. Then his voice became serious. Ronald just provided us something valuable. He admitted excluding the legal owner. Courtney looked toward the hotel window. Rain had begun falling outside. He doesn't realize that. No. Benjamin paused briefly. And we aren't going to educate him yet. That afternoon, Benjamin requested one additional document from the locksmith company through ordinary business inquiry. The invoice confirmed the customer requesting lock replacement. Ronald's name appeared clearly. Date, time, service description, payment confirmation. Benjamin placed the invoice beside Courtney's screenshot. Another fact, another document, another piece of a puzzle Ronald continued assembling against himself. Across town, Vanessa admired the new keys resting in a decorative bowl near the entrance. She picked one up and smiled. It finally feels secure. Ronald wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It is. Neither of them understood that security built upon assumption rarely survives contact with certified records. The new locks had kept Courtney outside the front door. They had not locked the truth away. In fact, with every decision Ronald made, he was quietly unlocking the case Benjamin was preparing to place before a judge. And, unlike doors, evidence rarely requires a key once it has been properly documented. By the second week after Courtney Green had left the house, Ronald no longer behaved like a man protecting his marriage. He behaved like a man celebrating victory. The confidence that had once helped him build a successful career had quietly transformed into something far more dangerous: certainty without verification. He convinced himself that because no sheriff had appeared at the front door, no judge had contacted him, and no dramatic confrontation had taken place. Benjamin Carter's letter had been nothing more than an empty threat. The narrator already knew otherwise. Legal disputes rarely announce themselves with raised voices. They begin with files, dates, receipts, certified copies, and patient people willing to let facts mature. Ronald underestimated every one of those things. On Saturday afternoon, Vanessa suggested inviting several friends to see the house after the first stage of redecorating. It still needs work, she admitted, while arranging flowers in the dining room. But it already feels beautiful. Ronald smiled. Let's do it. He wanted people to see what he believed was his new beginning. Vanessa spent the morning preparing appetizers. A catering company delivered trays of food. Fresh flowers decorated the kitchen island. Music played softly through the home's ceiling speakers. Nothing about the gathering appeared unusual, except for one fact. The woman hosting the party had absolutely no legal authority to occupy the property. At 3 o'clock, guests began arriving. Among them were Ronald's co-workers, several business acquaintances, and 2 couples from the neighborhood. Everyone complimented the renovations. The place looks amazing. I love what you've done with the living room. You've really transformed it. Vanessa accepted every compliment graciously. Thank you. We're still making changes. She spoke naturally, comfortably, repeatedly using the word we. Across the room, Ronald enjoyed every conversation. He poured drinks, told stories, laughed loudly. Several guests eventually gathered near the fireplace. One of Ronald's colleagues looked around the room. So everything's finalized. Ronald nodded confidently. It is now. The divorce. We're working through paperwork. The house. Ronald barely hesitated. I kept it. Another co-worker raised his glass. Congratulations. Everyone toasted. Only one person remained strangely quiet. David Monroe, the company's finance director. David had known Ronald professionally for nearly 6 years. He also knew enough about business law to avoid celebrating legal disputes before they were finished. He asked carefully, "Everything's documented." Ronald laughed. "Of course." David nodded politely. He did not ask another question, but he remembered Ronald's answer. Sometimes the most valuable witnesses are the people who speak the least. Across the street, Margaret Ellis watched the arriving cars from her living room window. She had no interest in the party itself. What caught her attention was the growing number of unfamiliar visitors entering a home whose legal situation she increasingly questioned. She quietly wrote down several license plate numbers, not because anyone had asked her to, because she believed details mattered. Years spent supervising school children had taught her something simple. People often remember emotions. Very few remember facts. Margaret preferred facts. Meanwhile, Benjamin Carter continued preparing the case. His office conference table had gradually disappeared beneath organized stacks of documents. Certified property records, trust agreements, tax histories, insurance files, bank statements, photographs, copies of text messages, delivery confirmations. Benjamin carefully labeled every section. He believed judges appreciated organization almost as much as evidence itself. Courtney sat across from him, reviewing another binder. "I didn't realize there would be this much paperwork." Benjamin smiled. "There usually isn't." She looked surprised. "There isn't?" "No." He adjusted his glasses. "Most people throw away documents. They rely on memory. They exaggerate. They forget dates." He gently tapped the notebook Courtney had maintained for years. "You didn't." Courtney lowered her eyes modestly. "I was only trying to stay organized." Benjamin answered quietly, "You accidentally became an excellent witness." Another package arrived at the house on Monday morning. This time it contained expensive lighting fixtures Vanessa had ordered online. The delivery driver asked Ronald to confirm the installation address. Ronald signed electronically. Again. His name appeared beside an address belonging to property he did not legally own. Every signature created another timestamp. Every timestamp strengthened chronology. Benjamin had often explained to younger attorneys that successful litigation rarely depended upon one dramatic piece of evidence. Instead, it resembled assembling thousands of tiny puzzle pieces until no reasonable picture remained, except the truth. Ronald continued providing those pieces voluntarily. That afternoon, Courtney received a phone call from Margaret. The two women had known each other for years, though neither would have described the relationship as particularly close. "Courtney." "Hello, Margaret. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all." Margaret hesitated briefly. "I thought you should know that there was another gathering at your house this weekend." Courtney remained silent. "They introduced Vanessa as though she lived there." "I understand." Margaret continued carefully. "I also heard Ronald tell several people he owned the property." Courtney picked up her notebook. "Do you remember approximately what time?" Margaret smiled softly. "I thought you might ask." She looked down at her own handwritten notes. "Saturday, around 4:15. He said I kept the house." Courtney wrote every word. "Thank you." There was something else. "Go ahead." "He also said everything was documented." Courtney paused. "I appreciate you telling me." Margaret's voice became gentler. "I watched you grow up in that home." There was a long silence. "I'm sorry this happened." Courtney looked through the hotel window before answering. "So am I." Neither woman mentioned anger. Neither mentioned revenge, only loss. Benjamin listened carefully after Courtney relayed the conversation. Margaret continues impressing me. She's very observant. Yes. He wrote another note. If she's willing, I'd eventually like a sworn affidavit. Courtney nodded. I think she'd help. Benjamin closed another folder. The evidence keeps growing. Courtney asked quietly, Is there such a thing as too much evidence? Benjamin actually laughed. No. There is only evidence that becomes repetitive. He paused thoughtfully. But repetitive evidence often demonstrates consistent behavior. He looked directly at Courtney. Ronald isn't making one mistake. He's making the same mistake repeatedly. Later that week, Benjamin received updated records from the Homeowners Association. The HOA account listed only one recognized owner, Courtney Green. The mailing history confirmed that annual correspondence had always been addressed to her. Meeting notices, maintenance updates, community voting materials, architectural approvals, everything. Ronald had attended neighborhood meetings several times over the years, yet he had apparently never noticed whose name appeared on the official records. Benjamin shook his head quietly. Assumption often blinds people to information sitting directly in front of them. Friday afternoon brought another development. Daniel Morris, the renovation project manager, emailed Ronald a draft construction agreement requesting final approval. The first page identified the homeowner. Ronald had instructed Daniel to write his own name. The draft reflected that instruction. Without reading carefully, Ronald electronically approved the proposal. The document immediately became legally time-stamped. Daniel had no reason to question the information. He relied upon what his client provided. Benjamin, however, would eventually examine every page. Not because Ronald had signed a renovation contract, because Ronald had falsely represented ownership after receiving formal legal notice. That distinction mattered enormously. As evening settled over the city, Courtney returned once more to her hotel room. She placed another set of notes inside the growing binder Benjamin had asked her to maintain. There were no dramatic discoveries that day. No emotional confrontations. Only another collection of facts, another witness, another document, another signature. Piece by piece, Ronald continued constructing the very case that would one day dismantle every claim he believed no one could challenge. And the quiet woman he had mistaken for powerless never once needed to interrupt him. She only needed to keep listening. 3 weeks after Ronald had told Courtney Green to leave the house, the dispute quietly entered a new phase. Nothing changed on the front lawn. The maple tree still swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Children still rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Delivery trucks still stopped in front of neighboring homes. To anyone driving through the subdivision, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Inside Benjamin Carter's office, however, ordinary had long since disappeared. The case was now moving into formal discovery. And discovery had a way of exposing assumptions that confidence could no longer protect. The narrator understood something Ronald did not. Until this point, nearly every piece of evidence had come from Courtney. Very soon, much of the evidence would begin coming from Ronald himself. Benjamin spread several legal documents across the conference table. Courtney sat opposite him with her notebook open. We've reached the stage where both parties are obligated to exchange relevant information, Benjamin explained. Courtney nodded. I've already provided everything I have. You have. Benjamin smiled. And that's precisely why we're in such a strong position. He slid another document toward her. This is our request for production. Courtney scanned the pages. The requests were remarkably specific. Copies of communications regarding the property, financial records related to renovations, contracts with contractors, electronic messages discussing ownership, insurance correspondence, utility account information, home improvement invoices. Benjamin pointed to another section. We're also requesting emails. Personal emails. Only those relevant to the property dispute. Courtney closed the folder gently. He won't like that. Benjamin's expression remained calm. Discovery isn't designed around what people like. It is designed around what courts need. Across town, Ronald received the discovery requests later that afternoon. He stared at the thick envelope resting on his desk. Vanessa entered his office carrying 2 cups of coffee. What is it? More paperwork. She placed the coffee beside him. From Courtney's lawyer. He nodded. Vanessa picked up the first page. They're asking for emails. Ronald rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. They're also asking for renovation contracts. So, she looked at him carefully. Do you have to provide them? If the court requires it. Vanessa hesitated. What happens if you don't? Ronald shrugged. I'll deal with it. He still believed the requests were merely procedural. He had not yet understood that refusing to cooperate often creates more legal problems than the original dispute itself. That evening, Ronald called his own attorney. His lawyer, Michael Donovan, had recently agreed to represent him after reviewing only a limited summary of the situation. Michael listened patiently while Ronald described the discovery requests. When Ronald finished, there was a brief silence. Then Michael asked the first question. Ronald, whose name is actually on the deed? Ronald frowned. I've lived there for years. I didn't ask that. I'm married. I didn't ask that either. Michael's voice remained professional. I asked whose name appears on the recorded deed. Ronald leaned back in his chair. I'm sure both of us. Michael waited. Are you sure? Another pause. I've never checked. Michael slowly removed his glasses. I need you to understand something. Ronald remained silent. I don't represent assumptions. I represent facts. If you don't know whose name is on the deed, he paused. Then we need to find out immediately. For the first time in weeks, Ronald felt a faint trace of uncertainty. It disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. I'm telling you, it's my house. Michael answered quietly. I hope the documents agree with you. The following morning, Michael requested a preliminary title search. He expected routine confirmation. Instead, 48 hours later, the report arrived. Michael read the first page twice, then a third time. He leaned back in his office chair. The property owner listed on the report was exactly one entity, the Green Family Trust. Beneficiary, Courtney Green. No transfer, no joint ownership, no subsequent deed. Nothing. Michael closed the file slowly. The situation had just become considerably more complicated. Meanwhile, Benjamin received confirmation that Ronald had retained legal counsel. He showed Courtney the notice. I expected this. Courtney nodded. So did I. Benjamin folded the paper neatly. A competent attorney changes the process, but not the facts. Courtney appreciated the distinction. Benjamin continued, if Mr. Donovan is thorough, he'll discover the same title records we already have. What happens then? Benjamin smiled faintly. He'll probably advise Ronald to negotiate. Courtney looked thoughtful. Do you think Ronald will listen? Benjamin considered the question carefully. No. He has ignored every uncomfortable fact so far. I doubt he'll begin now. Discovery continued. Ronald produced hundreds of pages of financial documents, credit card statements, furniture invoices, kitchen design estimates, lighting purchases, paint samples. Benjamin reviewed each page carefully. Most had little legal significance. Then one invoice caught his attention. Daniel Morris Construction Consulting. Customer name Ronald. Property owner Ronald. Benjamin quietly circled the line. "This," he said softly, "is interesting." Courtney looked at the page. He identified himself as owner. After receiving our demand letter. Benjamin nodded slowly. "Exactly. He placed the invoice inside a separate evidence folder. Misrepresentation, potentially intentional. Date confirmed. Next came the emails. Thousands of them. Benjamin's legal assistant organized everything chronologically. Most involved ordinary business matters. Several discussed renovation schedules. One message immediately stood out. Vanessa had written, "I can't believe we'll finally have our own house." Ronald replied only minutes later, "Everything is already mine, don't worry." Benjamin highlighted the exchange. Not because Vanessa's message mattered legally, because Ronald's response demonstrated his repeated claim of ownership after formal notice. The timeline remained consistent. Demand letter delivered. Discovery begins. False ownership claim repeated. Benjamin placed the email beside the renovation contract. Patterns often persuade judges more effectively than isolated mistakes. At the same time, Michael Donovan began asking Ronald increasingly uncomfortable questions. "Why didn't you tell me about the trust?" "I didn't know there was one." "You never reviewed the property records?" "No." Michael closed his notebook. "Did Courtney ever discuss family estate planning?" "Maybe." "You ignored it." "I didn't think it mattered." Michael looked directly at his client. "It matters now." Ronald rubbed his forehead. "So what do we do?" Michael chose his words carefully. "We determine whether there's any legal basis supporting your claim." "And if there isn't?" Michael remained silent for several seconds. Then he answered honestly, "We discuss settlement." Ronald immediately shook his head. "I'm not settling." Michael studied him carefully. "You haven't even heard my advice." "I don't need to. It's my house." Michael recognized the sentence instantly. Clients who repeat conclusions instead of addressing evidence rarely help themselves. Across town, Margaret Ellis received a visit from Benjamin. He thanked her personally for agreeing to provide a witness statement. Margaret invited him inside. "I've never been involved in court before." Benjamin smiled reassuringly. "Most witnesses haven't." She handed him several handwritten pages. "I made notes after each unusual event." Benjamin read silently. Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, conversations. Nothing dramatic, everything precise. He looked genuinely impressed. "Mrs. Ellis," she smiled. "Old teachers keep records." "I can see that." He carefully placed her statement inside a protective folder. "This may become very important." Margaret looked toward Courtney's house through the window. "I hope none of this becomes uglier than it already is," Benjamin answered quietly. "So do I." As discovery continued, the legal distance between truth and Ronald's version of events became increasingly impossible to ignore. Every document he produced confirmed another small piece of Courtney's timeline. Every signature strengthened chronology. Every email reinforced patterns. Yet Ronald remained convinced that confidence alone could somehow outweigh certified records. The irony had become unmistakable. The more evidence the court required, the more thoroughly Ronald disproved his own claims. And the quiet woman he believed had surrendered weeks earlier had not needed to chase the truth. She had simply allowed the legal process to uncover it, one document at a time. Nearly 2 months had passed since Ronald had stood in the front yard and told Courtney Green to leave what he confidently called his house. The neighborhood had returned to its familiar rhythm. Children still played basketball in driveways. Morning joggers still exchanged polite greetings. Lawns were trimmed every Saturday. To most people, the argument had become little more than an old story. Inside the county courthouse, however, the story was only beginning. The first formal hearing had finally arrived. Unlike television dramas, there would be no dramatic shouting surprise confessions or emotional speeches. Real courtrooms rewarded preparation rather than performance. Benjamin Carter had spent 40 years understanding that difference. Courtney had learned it from him. Ronald had not. Courtney arrived 25 minutes early. She wore a navy blue suit that had belonged to neither fashion trends nor expensive labels. It was simple, professional, appropriate. Benjamin believed judges noticed restraint. Courtney naturally possessed it. She carried no large briefcase, only a leather folder containing a notebook, several certified documents, and a pen. Nothing more. Benjamin was already waiting near the courtroom entrance. He greeted her with a quiet smile. "Good morning." "Good morning. Did you sleep?" "A little." "That's enough." He looked toward the courtroom doors. "Remember." Courtney nodded before he could continue. "Answer only what I'm asked." Benjamin smiled. "You've been listening." "I always do." Across the hallway, Ronald arrived with Michael Donovan. Vanessa accompanied them. She wore a tailored white dress and dark sunglasses despite being indoors. The confidence she had displayed weeks earlier remained visible, but something had changed. She spoke less. She looked around more. Discovery had introduced uncertainty into a situation Ronald had promised was simple. Michael noticed Ronald staring toward Courtney. "Don't approach her." "I wasn't going to." "Good." Michael adjusted his tie. "From this point forward, let me speak whenever possible." Ronald nodded distractedly. He still believed the hearing would simply confirm what he had insisted all along. At precisely 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone entered quietly. The courtroom itself reflected the understated dignity of American civil procedure. Wood-paneled walls, state flags, simple benches, no cameras, no audience seeking entertainment. Only attorneys, litigants, court staff, and a handful of observers waiting for unrelated cases. Courtney sat beside Benjamin. Across the aisle sat Ronald beside Michael. Vanessa remained in the gallery. Margaret Ellis quietly entered several minutes later after receiving permission to observe. She nodded politely toward Courtney. Courtney returned the gesture. Neither smiled. This was not a victory. It was a legal proceeding. The clerk called the case. Benjamin and Michael stood. The judge entered moments later. Judge Eleanor Whitmore had served on the bench for nearly 15 years. Her reputation was straightforward. She appreciated preparation. She disliked exaggeration. Benjamin had appeared before her many times. He understood her habits. Michael did as well. After reviewing the case file briefly, Judge Whitmore looked toward both attorneys. "Good morning." Benjamin responded first. "Good morning, Your Honor." Michael followed. "Good morning." The judge opened the file. This matter concerns disputed possession and ownership of residential property. She looked toward Benjamin. "Counsel, are we addressing preliminary issues today?" "Yes, Your Honor." Benjamin stood. "We are requesting temporary relief, restoring my client's access to the property, and establishing preservation of evidence while litigation continues." Judge Whitmore nodded. She turned toward Michael. "Response?" Michael rose slowly. Your Honor, we request additional time to review certain ownership issues. Benjamin remained expressionless. The judge noticed immediately. Ownership issues. Michael chose his words carefully. There are trust documents requiring further examination. Judge Whitmore glanced down at the file. So ownership is not as straightforward as originally represented. Michael hesitated. Correct. Ronald shifted slightly in his chair. It was the first time he had heard his own attorney publicly acknowledge uncertainty. Benjamin approached the podium. Your Honor, with the court's permission. Judge Whitmore nodded. Benjamin handed several certified copies to the clerk. The documents were distributed to the judge. Certified warranty deed, county recording certificate, Green Family Trust, current title report. Judge Whitmore reviewed each page carefully. She spent nearly 5 minutes reading without interruption. The courtroom remained silent. Finally, she looked toward Michael. Counsel. Yes, Your Honor. Do you dispute the authenticity of these certified records? Michael answered honestly. Not at this time. Ronald turned toward him in disbelief. Michael kept his eyes on the judge. Professional responsibility required honesty, not optimism. Judge Whitmore looked back toward Benjamin. The certified title report identifies the Green Family Trust as owner. Yes, Your Honor. The beneficiary, Courtney Green. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. She then addressed Michael again. Does your client possess any recorded deed transferring ownership? Michael paused. No, Your Honor. Any recorded conveyance? No. Any written trust amendment? No. Judge Whitmore made several notes. Ronald felt his stomach tighten. This was not the conversation he had expected. Benjamin remained standing. Your Honor, my client has also been excluded from the residence through unilateral lock replacement. Judge Whitmore looked up. What evidence supports that statement? Benjamin handed another folder to the clerk. Inside were photographs, the locksmith invoice, Courtney's text message screenshot, certified delivery confirmation for the demand letter. Judge Whitmore examined each document carefully. When was the demand letter delivered? Benjamin answered immediately. 6 weeks ago. And after receiving notice, the locks were changed? Yes. Judge Whitmore turned another page. The text message states. She read silently before looking toward Michael. Does your client dispute sending this message? Michael looked briefly at Ronald, then answered, No, Your Honor. For the first time that morning, Judge Whitmore looked directly at Ronald. Mr. Ronald? He stood. Yes, Your Honor. Did you instruct a locksmith to replace the exterior locks? Yes. Were you aware there was a dispute regarding ownership? I believe the house belonged to me. Judge Whitmore remained calm. That was not my question. Ronald hesitated. Were you aware ownership was disputed? Yes. The judge wrote another note. Were you aware legal counsel had notified you that title remained elsewhere? Ronald swallowed. Yes. Judge Whitmore nodded once. You may sit. Vanessa watched from the gallery. For the first time since moving into the house, she realized Ronald had not merely been arguing with Courtney. He had ignored formal legal notice. The distinction suddenly felt enormous. She quietly lowered her eyes. Benjamin resumed. Your Honor, we're not asking the court to decide the entire case today. We're asking only that evidence be preserved, and that my client not remain excluded from property she has presented certified evidence of owning. Judge Whitmore considered the request. She looked again toward Michael. Any objection? Michael stood. We request additional time for complete document review. Benjamin remained silent. Judge Whitmore thought for several moments. Finally, she spoke. "The court will not issue final findings today." She paused. However, everyone in the courtroom seemed to stop breathing. "The court finds sufficient preliminary evidence establishing serious questions regarding ownership." She continued. "The parties are ordered to preserve all physical and electronic evidence. No renovations. No destruction of documents. No removal of fixtures. No alteration of surveillance recordings." Benjamin nodded. Michael nodded. Judge Whitmore continued. "Additionally," she looked directly toward Ronald, "the court strongly advises compliance with discovery obligations." Her tone remained calm, but everyone understood the warning. Failure would carry consequences. The hearing concluded less than 45 minutes later. No dramatic verdict had been announced. No one had won. Yet, as Benjamin organized his files, he quietly understood something important. The judge had not accepted Ronald's assumptions. She had accepted certified records. Outside the courtroom, Ronald walked beside Michael in complete silence. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you argue harder?" Michael stopped walking. "I argued the facts available to me." Ronald frowned. "You were supposed to defend me." Michael met his eyes. "I am." He paused. "But first, you need facts capable of being defended." Ronald had no answer. Across the hallway, Courtney quietly closed her notebook. She had spoken only one sentence during the entire hearing. She had not needed more. For the first time since leaving her home, she realized something had begun to change. Not because anyone believed her story, because the documents were beginning to speak for themselves, and in a courtroom, they carried far more weight than confidence ever could. The first hearing did not end the dispute. It changed its direction. When Ronald walked out of the courthouse, he still believed the judge had simply postponed the inevitable recognition that the house belonged to him. That belief survived, only because he continued measuring the case by emotion instead of evidence. Benjamin Carter measured it differently. He measured it by chronology. Every certified document accepted into the court file. Every admission made under oath. Every unanswered question. Every contradiction. The foundation of the case had shifted. Now, Benjamin intended to prove not only that Courtney Green owned the property, but that Ronald had continued asserting ownership after receiving unmistakable legal notice that he did not. That distinction mattered. Courts often recognize mistakes. They are far less patient with deliberate misrepresentations. The Monday after the hearing, Benjamin met Courtney in his office. Stacks of evidence covered nearly the entire conference table. Unlike previous meetings, Benjamin no longer looked concerned. He looked focused. He placed a yellow legal pad between them. "Today," he said, "we stopped gathering documents." Courtney looked surprised. "We have enough," Benjamin smiled. "We have more than enough." He pointed toward the nearest binder. "The challenge is no longer quantity. It's organization." Courtney nodded. Benjamin opened the first binder. "I want you to see something." He arranged several documents in chronological order. The original warranty deed, the family trust, certified title report, property tax records, insurance renewals, annual maintenance payments, bank statements. Then he placed another set beside them. The demand letter, the certified delivery receipt, Ronald's text message, the locksmith invoice, the renovation agreement. Finally, he added printed emails produced during discovery. Benjamin leaned back. When these documents are viewed individually, they're ordinary. He slid them together. When they're viewed together, they tell one uninterrupted story. Courtney looked carefully at the timeline. For the first time, she realized she no longer needed to explain what had happened. The paperwork explained everything. Benjamin turned to another binder. This section concerns financial responsibility. He removed several enlarged charts. Over 8 years, every major expense associated with the property had been traced. Property taxes, insurance premiums, roof replacement, foundation repair, heating system, tree removal after a storm, window replacement, emergency plumbing. Every payment originated from Courtney's account or directly from the Green Family Trust. Benjamin circled several entries. Notice anything? Courtney studied the pages. I paid everything. Almost. Benjamin pulled another document forward. Ronald had occasionally paid utility bills. Electricity, internet, water. Benjamin smiled faintly. Living expenses. He pointed toward Courtney's records. Ownership expenses. He let the distinction settle. The law treats those very differently. Courtney understood immediately. Someone renting an apartment could pay electricity for years. That never made the apartment theirs. Meanwhile, Michael Donovan continued reviewing Ronald's documents. His office had become noticeably quieter. Each new file seemed to remove another possible defense. Michael highlighted one email after another. None helped his client. Instead, they consistently reinforced Courtney's position. Late Tuesday afternoon, he called Ronald. "We need to meet." "Is something wrong?" "Yes." An hour later, Ronald entered Michael's office. The attorney handed him several printed pages. "Read these." Ronald recognized the emails immediately. One message from Vanessa, another from himself. He frowned. "So," Michael folded his hands. "You replied." He pointed toward the highlighted sentence. "Everything is already mine." Ronald shrugged. It was true. Michael remained silent. Then he placed the certified delivery receipt beside the email. "This message was sent 4 days after you received formal notice disputing ownership." Ronald looked confused. "I still believed it." Michael nodded. "I understand. But belief isn't evidence." Ronald shifted uncomfortably. Michael continued. "The problem isn't what you believed. The problem is what you represented." There was a long silence. Finally, Ronald spoke. "So, what are you saying?" Michael answered honestly. "I'm saying the court may conclude you knowingly continued making ownership claims after receiving contrary legal documentation." Ronald stared at the papers. "I never lied." Michael chose his words carefully. "I'm not discussing intent. I'm discussing appearances. And appearances matter." Across town, Vanessa experienced her own growing uncertainty. For weeks, she had relied entirely upon Ronald's confidence. Now that confidence seemed increasingly unsupported. She opened a kitchen drawer, searching for warranty information on one of the new appliances. Instead, she found a copy of Benjamin's demand letter. She read every page slowly. This time, she did not stop after the first paragraph. She finished every word. The language surprised her. There were no insults, no threats, only documentation, dates, recording numbers, county references, trust information. She quietly folded the letter again. When Ronald entered the kitchen later that evening, she looked directly at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have you actually seen the deed?" Ronald froze for the briefest moment. "I've lived there for years." She remained patient. "I didn't ask that." He looked away. "No." "Have you ever read it?" "No." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "So you've been assuming." Ronald became defensive. "I know what belongs to me." Vanessa said nothing more. For the first time since moving into the house, she wondered whether she had built her future on someone else's certainty rather than on facts. Benjamin's office received another production of financial records later that week. His paralegal entered carrying several folders. These just arrived. Benjamin opened them immediately. Credit card statements, bank transfers, receipts. One receipt caught his attention. A luxury furniture purchase totaling nearly $28,000. Delivery address, Courtney's house. Purchaser, Ronald. Purchase date, 3 weeks after the demand letter. Benjamin quietly placed the receipt beside renovation invoices. Interesting. His paralegal looked over. What is it? He continued investing in improvements after receiving legal notice. Does that help us? Benjamin nodded slowly. It helps establish chronology. He paused. And state of mind. Later that afternoon, Courtney arrived. Benjamin showed her the latest evidence. She examined the furniture receipt. I remember that dining table. You've seen it. It replaced the one my parents bought. Benjamin looked at her carefully. Does that upset you? Courtney considered the question. A little. Then she shook her head. But replacing furniture doesn't replace history. Benjamin smiled. I was hoping you'd say something like that. She looked surprised. Why? Because judges notice perspective. He closed the folder. You've never once asked me to punish Ronald. Courtney answered quietly. I only want the truth recognized. Benjamin nodded. And that's exactly what we're asking the court to do. The final document of the week arrived electronically just before 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. It was an automatically generated activity report from the home's cloud security system. Benjamin opened it. Every exterior camera remained active. Every recording remained preserved. The account administrator, Courtney Green, the user who had downloaded footage over the previous month. Courtney. No alterations, no deletions, no missing files. Benjamin smiled. Another concern eliminated. He printed the report and added it to the evidence binder. Then he looked toward the growing collection of organized documents covering the conference table. There were no dramatic revelations left to uncover. No secret witnesses waiting in the hallway. No surprise confessions. There didn't need to be. Real legal cases are rarely won by a single shocking moment. They are won when every ordinary fact points toward exactly the same conclusion. And with each passing day, every document Ronald had created, signed, ignored, or approved continued pointing in only one direction. Toward the quiet woman he had ordered to leave her own home. Toward the records he had never bothered to read. Toward a truth that no amount of confidence could rewrite. The evidence no longer needed Courtney's voice. It had learned to speak for itself. The weeks following the preliminary hearing brought a different kind of pressure. It did not arrive with flashing lights or urgent phone calls. It arrived quietly, one conversation at a time, one unanswered question after another, one uncomfortable realization slowly replacing another. Truth rarely spreads dramatically. It moves through ordinary people who begin comparing what they have been told with what they have now seen. Ronald had spent months controlling the story. Now the documents were beginning to tell one of their own. And unlike people, documents never changed their memories. Monday morning began like any other at Ronald's office. Employees greeted one another. Coffee machines hummed. Morning meetings filled conference rooms. From a distance, nothing appeared different. Yet Ronald sensed it almost immediately. Conversations became quieter when he entered. Co-workers who once joked freely now seemed careful with their words. No one accused him of anything. No one confronted him. But curiosity had quietly replaced admiration. David Monroe, the company's finance director, approached Ronald outside the break room. "Morning. Morning." David hesitated before speaking again. "I heard the first hearing happened." Ronald forced a smile. "It was routine." "I'm sure." David nodded politely. "So, everything's moving forward?" "Exactly." David studied Ronald for a brief moment. "I hope it works out." It sounded supportive. But Ronald noticed something missing. David had not asked whether Ronald won. He had asked only whether things worked out. Even that small difference unsettled him. Inside another office, two employees discussed the hearing after reading publicly available court scheduling information. "I heard the judge questioned ownership." "I heard the same." "I thought Ronald owned the place." "So did I." Neither employee claimed to know the truth. They simply admitted that they no longer knew what to believe. Reputation often changes long before legal judgments do. Across town, Benjamin Carter continued preparing witness files. He arranged each witness according to relevance rather than emotion. Margaret Ellis, Evergreen Moving Services Supervisor, locksmith technician, renovation consultant Daniel Morris, several of Ronald's co-workers. Benjamin explained his strategy to Courtney. "We don't need every witness." Courtney looked over the list. "Then why contact so many?" "Because consistency matters." He placed Margaret's statement beside the moving supervisor's written account. "They don't know each other. They have different backgrounds. They observed different moments." He smiled. "And yet..." Courtney finished the sentence. "They described the same pattern." "Exactly." Benjamin leaned back. Independent witnesses strengthen credibility. Margaret arrived that afternoon to review her affidavit. Benjamin welcomed her warmly. "Thank you for coming. I'm happy to help." He handed her the typed version of her earlier notes. "Please read everything carefully." Margaret adjusted her reading glasses. She moved slowly through every page. Several minutes later, she looked up. "This accurately reflects what I observed." Benjamin nodded. "Would you change anything?" "No." She paused. "I would add one sentence." Benjamin picked up his pen. "What is it?" Margaret thought carefully. Courtney never raised her voice. Benjamin looked at her. "Why does that matter?" "Because everyone else did enough talking." Benjamin quietly wrote the sentence. It was a simple observation. Yet it summarized months of behavior more effectively than any dramatic description could have. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat alone in the house one afternoon while Ronald attended meetings. The silence felt different now. When she first moved in, every room had represented excitement. Now, each room carried uncertainty. She wandered into the study. Most shelves still contained boxes Courtney had never returned to collect. One box remained partly open. Inside rested several framed photographs. Vanessa hesitated. Then she picked up one picture. Courtney stood beside two older people in front of the same maple tree growing outside. Everyone smiled naturally. The photograph looked decades old. Vanessa turned it over. On the back, handwritten in fading blue ink, were simple words. Courtney's 18th birthday. Home forever. Love, Mom and Dad. Vanessa stared at the sentence for several moments. Home forever. The words lingered in her mind. Until that moment, she had viewed the property only as a beautiful house. For the first time, she understood it had been someone's family home. Long before Ronald entered the picture. She carefully placed the photograph back into the box, exactly where she had found it. She closed the lid gently. That evening, she asked Ronald another question. Did Courtney grow up here? Ronald barely looked away from the television. I think so. You think? I never really asked. Vanessa looked surprised. You were married for 8 years. Ronald shrugged. It never mattered. Vanessa quietly looked toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Perhaps it should have. Benjamin's office received signed statements from 2 Evergreen Moving Services employees later that week. Both described essentially the same events. Ronald introducing Vanessa as someone moving into the home. Courtney arriving unexpectedly. No argument initiated by Courtney. Professional movers following Ronald's instructions. Benjamin highlighted one sentence written by the moving supervisor. The woman identified as Courtney remained calm throughout the interaction, despite being informed she would no longer be living in the residence. Benjamin smiled faintly. Another independent observation. Another consistent account. Another piece fitting perfectly into the larger picture. Michael Donovan also continued reviewing the growing evidence. By now, his meetings with Ronald had become noticeably shorter. There were fewer optimistic discussions, more difficult conversations. He spread several witness summaries across his desk. Ronald? What? We need to discuss settlement again. Ronald immediately shook his head. No. Michael remained patient. At least hear me out. I already know what you're going to say. I doubt that. Michael folded his hands. I'm telling you that litigation risk has increased significantly. Ronald crossed his arms. Because of neighbors. Because of documents. Michael corrected him gently. And because every independent witness tells the same story. Ronald stood and walked toward the office window. They're taking her side. Michael answered honestly. No. They're describing what they observed. There was an important difference. Ronald refused to acknowledge it. Later that week, Benjamin and Courtney reviewed additional financial evidence. Everything remained remarkably consistent. Courtney quietly closed another binder. I keep expecting something unexpected. Benjamin smiled. Why? Because this has gone on for months. He nodded thoughtfully. Most people think complicated cases depend on dramatic surprises. They don't. No. He pointed toward the organized evidence. Complicated cases depend on ordinary facts remaining consistent. He paused. The remarkable thing about your case, Courtney waited, is that nothing important has changed. The truth today is exactly what it was before Ronald moved into the house. Friday afternoon brought another subtle but meaningful development. One of Ronald's business clients requested a meeting. The client had followed local court filings after hearing rumors within the industry. During their discussion, the client casually asked, I heard you're dealing with a property dispute. Ronald forced another confident smile. Just legal paperwork. The client nodded. I understand. Then he asked, everything will be resolved soon. I expect so. The client smiled politely. I hope that's true. The meeting continued. Business remained professional. Yet Ronald noticed something again. No one automatically accepted his version anymore. People had begun waiting for documentation. Trust, once easily given, had become conditional. That evening, Courtney returned to the hotel after another long day. She opened her notebook as usual. The pages had become thicker. The entries had become fewer. Not because less was happening. Because the legal process had gradually replaced personal observation. She wrote only one sentence. Truth no longer depends on my memory alone. She closed the notebook. Across the city, Ronald sat in the living room, believing he still had time to regain control of the narrative. He did not realize that control had quietly slipped away weeks earlier. The story no longer belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to certified records, independent witnesses, consistent timelines, and ordinary people whose memories aligned without ever needing to coordinate. The legal case was becoming stronger. But something else was changing as well. Outside the courtroom, outside the evidence binders and sworn statements, people were beginning to recognize a simpler truth. The woman Ronald had dismissed as weak had never fought to embarrass him. She had only insisted that facts be allowed to speak. And little by little, they were doing exactly that. By the time the final trial began, nearly 5 months had passed since Ronald had handed Vanessa Brooks a key and welcomed her into the house he insisted belonged to him. Seasons had quietly changed. The maple tree outside the property had begun exchanging deep green leaves for early shades of gold. Morning air carried the first hint of autumn. Inside the county courthouse, however, the atmosphere remained unchanged. Facts did not recognize seasons. Neither did the law. Today, unlike the preliminary hearing, the court would examine the entire dispute: ownership, possession, conduct, evidence. Every document collected over the previous months would finally be presented as one complete story. Benjamin Carter had spent weeks preparing for this morning, not because he expected surprises, because he expected precision. Courtney arrived early once again. She wore the same restrained style that had become familiar throughout the proceedings. Dark navy suit, simple pearl earrings, hair neatly tied back. No dramatic appearance, no attempt to influence emotion. Benjamin often reminded younger attorneys that credibility begins long before the first word is spoken. Courtney understood that instinctively. When Benjamin greeted her outside the courtroom, he carried only 2 leather binders. A younger associate accompanying him pulled a rolling case containing additional exhibits. Courtney looked at the binders. "Only 2, Benjamin smiled. "The rest has already been submitted." She nodded. "We've spent months preparing. Today we simply explain." Across the hallway, Michael Donovan quietly reviewed his own notes. Ronald sat beside him in silence. Vanessa remained several rows behind them. She had chosen not to sit beside Ronald this time. The distance was small, yet it revealed more than either of them wished to admit. Michael finally broke the silence. "I need one promise." Ronald looked at him. "What?" "When you're questioned," he paused, "answer only the question." Ronald frowned. "I always do." Michael looked directly into his eyes. "No. You answer the argument you wish had been asked." The words settled heavily between them. Ronald said nothing more. The courtroom came to order promptly at 9 o'clock. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The judge reviewed the docket before looking toward both attorneys. "We're here today for trial on the merits." Benjamin stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Michael followed. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Proceed." Benjamin's opening statement lasted less than 15 minutes. He never raised his voice, never pointed toward Ronald, never appealed to sympathy. Instead, he walked slowly through the timeline. He described Courtney's parents establishing the Green Family Trust. He explained the original warranty deed, the recorded chain of title, annual tax payments, insurance records, maintenance history. Every fact appeared supported by certified documentation. Benjamin concluded quietly, "This case is not about revenge. It is not about the end of a marriage. It is not about personal disappointment." He looked briefly toward the judge. "It is about whether recorded ownership may be replaced by repeated assumption." He returned to counsel table without another word. Judge Whitmore made several notes. Michael rose next. His opening statement reflected the difficult position he now occupied. He did not challenge the authenticity of the property records. Instead, he argued that Ronald had genuinely believed he possessed ownership rights because of the marriage, his years of residence, and his financial contributions to household expenses. Michael chose his words carefully. My client acknowledges mistakes. He disputes intent. Benjamin listened quietly. Intent, not ownership. Even before witnesses testified, the central issue had shifted. Benjamin called his first witness. Benjamin Carter himself did not testify. Instead, he called the county records custodian. The official confirmed the authenticity of every certified property document submitted into evidence. Original recording dates, recording numbers, trust registration, no transfers, no amendments removing Courtney as beneficiary, no deed adding Ronald. Michael declined lengthy cross-examination. There was little to dispute. Official records either existed or they did not. The second witness was Daniel Morris, the renovation consultant. Benjamin asked only straightforward questions. Who hired you? Ronald. What information did he provide? He identified himself as the homeowner. Benjamin displayed the renovation proposal. Is this the document? Yes. Whose name appears as owner? Ronald's. Benjamin nodded. No further questions. Michael stood. Mr. Morris, did you independently verify ownership? No. You relied entirely upon what my client told you. Yes. Thank you. Neither attorney argued. The document spoke clearly enough. Next came the locksmith. He identified the invoice, confirmed Ronald requested replacement of every exterior lock, verified payment, explained that no one else participated in the decision. Again, Michael asked only limited questions. Nothing changed. The invoice remained exactly what it had always been. Margaret Ellis testified next. She walked carefully to the witness stand. After taking the oath, Benjamin smiled warmly. Mrs. Ellis, how long have you lived across from the property? Nearly 30 years. Were you familiar with Courtney Green before this dispute? Yes. I watched her grow up. Benjamin allowed a brief silence. Please describe what you observed the day Vanessa Brooks moved into the residence. Margaret spoke calmly. She described the moving truck, the furniture, Ronald welcoming Vanessa, Courtney arriving. No shouting from Courtney, no threats, no argument. Benjamin asked one final question. Did Courtney ever claim ownership in front of you? Margaret thought for a moment. No. What did she do? She watched. Benjamin nodded. No further questions. Michael approached carefully. Mrs. Ellis. Yes. You care about Courtney. I do. Could that influence your memory? Margaret smiled gently. I was a school principal for 38 years. She paused. I learned long ago that feelings change. Written notes don't. Several jurors quietly looked toward her. Michael thanked her and returned to counsel table. Benjamin's next witness surprised no one. Courtney herself. She walked to the witness stand calmly. After taking the oath, Benjamin began. Miss Green. Yes. Did you inherit the beneficial interest in the Green Family Trust? Yes. Did you ever transfer that ownership to Ronald? No. Did you ever authorize him to exclude you from the residence? No. Benjamin displayed bank records. Who paid these property taxes? I did. This insurance? I did. This roof replacement? I did. The questioning remained methodical. No emotional detours. Then Benjamin asked quietly, When Ronald told you to leave. Courtney looked briefly toward the judge before answering. I left peacefully. Why? She considered the question. Because arguing wouldn't change recorded ownership. The courtroom remained silent. Benjamin nodded once. No further questions. Michael approached for cross-examination. He knew Courtney had performed well. He also knew she had remained careful. Miss Green? Yes. Did Ronald contribute financially during the marriage? Yes. Utilities? Yes. Groceries? Yes. Household expenses? Yes. Michael nodded. So, he believed he was investing in the home. Courtney answered honestly. I believe he did. The admission surprised Ronald. Michael continued. You understand why he may have been confused? Courtney looked directly at him. I understand confusion. She paused briefly. I don't understand ignoring certified records after receiving them. Michael remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded. No further questions. The distinction had landed exactly where Benjamin hoped it would. The case was no longer about misunderstanding the past. It was about the decisions Ronald made after the truth had been placed directly into his hands. Judge Whitmore called for a short afternoon recess. As everyone quietly stood, Benjamin gathered his files. The most difficult testimony still lay ahead. Soon Ronald himself would take the witness stand. And for the first time, he would have to answer questions, not with confidence, but under oath. When court resumed after the afternoon recess, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had subtly changed. The morning had been devoted almost entirely to documents. Certified records, financial history, independent witnesses. Everything had been orderly, predictable, and supported by paper. The afternoon would be different. Now the court would hear directly from Ronald. Unlike documents, people could hesitate. People could forget. People could contradict themselves. The narrator already knew which of those would happen first. Michael Donovan stood. The defense calls Ronald. Ronald slowly walked toward the witness stand. He adjusted his suit jacket before taking the oath. For a brief moment, he looked exactly as he had during countless business presentations throughout his career. Confident, composed, prepared. But boardrooms rewarded persuasion. Courtrooms rewarded accuracy. Those were not always the same thing. Michael began gently. Please state your name. Ronald. Were you married to Courtney Green? Yes. How long? 8 years. During those years, where did you live? At the property? Did you contribute financially to the household? Yes. Michael displayed several utility bills. Did you pay these? Yes. What about internet service? Yes. General maintenance? Sometimes. Michael nodded. Did you honestly believe you had ownership rights in the home? I absolutely did. His answer came quickly. Without hesitation, Michael looked toward the judge. No further questions. He knew there was little more he could accomplish. The defense had established Ronald's belief. Now Benjamin would examine the difference between belief and conduct. Benjamin approached slowly. He carried only a thin folder. No stack of binders, no dramatic exhibits. He stopped a few feet from the witness stand. Good afternoon, Mr. Ronald. Good afternoon. Benjamin smiled politely. You testified that you believed you owned the property. Yes. I'd like to discuss when that belief changed. It never did. Benjamin nodded. I understand that's your position. He opened the folder. Let's begin with something simple. Benjamin held up the certified delivery confirmation. Do you recognize this document? Ronald looked briefly. Yes. What is it? The certified letter. From my office? Yes. You personally signed for it? I did. Benjamin waited. What date? Ronald looked again. He quietly read the printed date aloud. Benjamin nodded. So, by that date, he paused deliberately. You had been formally notified that Courtney Green claimed legal ownership. Yes. I didn't ask whether you agreed. Benjamin's tone remained calm. I asked whether you had received notice. Yes. Benjamin thanked him. Then he reached for another exhibit, the renovation agreement. 4 days later, he held up the document. You signed this renovation proposal? Yes. What title did you provide the contractor? Ronald looked uncomfortable. I said I was the owner. Benjamin remained silent for several seconds. The courtroom seemed unusually still. You had already received the demand letter. Yes. You nevertheless represented yourself as owner. Yes. Benjamin nodded once. No further explanation needed. He placed the document on the evidence table. Next came the emails. Benjamin displayed the enlarged exhibit on courtroom monitors. The message appeared exactly as it had been written. Vanessa. I can't believe we'll finally have our own house. Ronald. Everything is already mine. Don't worry. Benjamin looked toward Ronald. When was this written? Ronald quietly read the date. Several days after the demand letter. Benjamin nodded. So after receiving certified notice, he paused. You again represented the property as yours. Ronald shifted in his chair. I believed it. Benjamin smiled gently. I'm not questioning what you believed. I'm asking what you represented. There was another long silence. I represented that it was mine. Benjamin thanked him, again. No raised voice, no accusation, only chronology. Benjamin reached for another document. The locksmith invoice. Did you hire this locksmith? Yes. Did you replace every exterior lock? Yes. Why? So Courtney couldn't come back. The answer escaped before Ronald realized its significance. Benjamin allowed the words to settle. You intended to prevent her from entering? Yes. You understood there was already a legal dispute regarding ownership? Yes. Benjamin nodded. No further questions regarding the locks. Judge Whitmore quietly wrote another note. Several jurors looked down at their own notebooks. Benjamin walked back to counsel table, then returned holding a single photograph. The framed family picture Courtney had removed before leaving. He showed it to Ronald. Do you recognize this? Yes. Whose parents are pictured? Courtney's. Where was this photograph displayed? In the living room. For how many years? I don't know. Benjamin waited. Long enough that you saw it every day? Yes. Benjamin lowered the photograph. You knew she had grown up in that home? Yes. You understood it had belonged to her family? Yes. Benjamin looked directly at Ronald. And yet, he paused. You never once reviewed the ownership documents before telling her to leave. Ronald lowered his eyes. No. Benjamin quietly returned the photograph to the evidence table. No further questions. Michael declined redirect examination. He understood additional questions would likely create additional admissions. Sometimes the wisest legal decision is knowing when to stop. The defense rested. Benjamin rested shortly afterward. Judge Whitmore looked toward both attorneys. Closing arguments tomorrow morning. Court adjourned for the day. The following morning, the courtroom filled earlier than usual. Word had quietly spread through the courthouse that the evidence had become unusually one-sided. Benjamin delivered his closing argument first. He stood without notes. Only a single folder rested on the podium. This case has never required the court to decide whether Ronald contributed to a marriage. He did. It has never required the court to decide whether Ronald sincerely misunderstood ownership. He may have. Benjamin paused. The issue before this court is far narrower. He looked toward the judge. After certified notice. After receiving legal documentation. After learning that recorded title contradicted his assumptions. Benjamin allowed another brief silence. What did Ronald choose to do? He answered his own question. He changed the locks. He signed renovation contracts identifying himself as owner. He repeatedly represented the property as his. He excluded the legal owner. Benjamin closed the folder. The documents tell one story. The witnesses tell the same story. Even Mr. Ronald's testimony tells the same story. He returned quietly to his seat. Michael stood. His closing argument remained respectful. He acknowledged Ronald's mistakes. He emphasized confusion rather than malice. He argued that long years of marriage had created genuine misunderstanding. When he finished, he looked toward Ronald with quiet sympathy. It was the strongest argument remaining. Unfortunately, confusion explained only the beginning of the timeline. It did not explain everything that followed. Judge Whitmore reviewed her notes for several minutes. The courtroom remained completely silent. Finally, she looked up. The court is prepared to rule. Every chair seemed to stop moving. Every whispered conversation disappeared. Courtney folded her hands quietly. Benjamin remained motionless. Ronald stared straight ahead. Judge Whitmore began slowly. The court finds the certified property records authentic and controlling. She continued. The Green Family Trust has remained the legal owner of the subject property throughout the relevant period. She looked toward Courtney. Courtney Green is the sole beneficial owner. Ronald closed his eyes. The judge continued. The court further finds that Mr. Ronald continued asserting ownership after receiving formal legal notice contradicting that position. She paused. The evidence supporting that conclusion includes certified documents, independent witness testimony, financial records, electronic communications, and Mr. Ronald's own testimony. Another brief silence. Accordingly, she looked toward both parties. Judgment is entered in favor of Courtney Green. The words were calm, measured, professional. Yet they changed everything. The courtroom remained silent. Courtney did not cry. She did not smile. She simply lowered her head for one brief moment. Not in triumph, in relief. Because after months of patience, records, and restraint, the truth had finally been recognized exactly as it had existed from the very beginning. The courtroom emptied slowly after Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered judgment in favor of Courtney Green. There were no reporters waiting in the hallway, no cameras, no applause. Most civil cases end exactly this way, quietly. Lives change without an audience. Courtney remained seated for several moments after everyone else began gathering their belongings. She looked at the empty witness stand where so many months of uncertainty had finally come to rest. Benjamin Carter closed the last evidence binder and placed it carefully inside his briefcase. Then he turned toward her. It's over. Courtney took a slow breath. The case is. Benjamin smiled gently. The healing will take longer. She nodded. I know. Across the courtroom, Ronald remained standing beside Michael Donovan. Neither man spoke immediately. Michael quietly organized his files. After nearly a minute, Ronald finally broke the silence. So that's it. Michael looked at him honestly. As far as ownership is concerned, he paused. Yes. Ronald stared toward the judge's empty bench. I really thought... Michael finished the sentence for him. I know. You believed living there made it yours. Ronald lowered his head. I stopped checking facts. Michael placed a hand lightly on his briefcase. You stopped believing you needed to. There was a difference, and now Ronald understood it. Vanessa waited outside the courtroom doors. When Ronald finally stepped into the hallway, she looked at him quietly. Neither of them embraced. Neither blamed the other. Silence had replaced certainty. After several long seconds, Vanessa asked the question that had lived quietly inside her for weeks. Did you ever actually read the trust documents? Ronald looked at the floor. No. She closed her eyes briefly. I should have asked sooner. So should I. Neither sentence sounded angry, only tired. Some mistakes become too large for arguments. Benjamin walked Courtney through the next legal steps. The judgment confirms ownership. She nodded. What happens now? We prepare the enforcement documents. He explained the process carefully. A formal writ confirming Courtney's exclusive right to possession. A deadline for Ronald and Vanessa to vacate the property. Inventory procedures, transfer of keys, inspection. Everything would occur according to ordinary legal procedure. No surprises, no public embarrassment. Courtney listened carefully. I don't want deputies arriving, if it can be avoided. Benjamin smiled. I suspected you'd say that. He had already prepared a proposal. Ronald would receive reasonable time to remove his belongings voluntarily. Only if he refused would further enforcement become necessary. Courtney appreciated the approach. She had never wanted revenge. She simply wanted the law respected. 3 days later, Michael met Ronald in his office once again. The atmosphere differed completely from previous meetings. The litigation was finished. Only compliance remained. Michael placed the court order on the desk. You have 14 days. Ronald slowly read every page. Unlike months earlier, he now examined each sentence carefully. Every paragraph, every signature, every seal. Ironically, he had finally learned to read legal documents only after they had determined his future. Michael watched quietly. I've arranged movers if you want recommendations. Ronald nodded absent-mindedly. I'll handle it. Michael stood. I believe that's wise. Before leaving, Ronald stopped at the office door. Michael. Yes. I made this much harder than it needed to be. Michael answered gently. Most people don't lose cases because of one mistake. They lose them because they repeat the same mistake after someone shows them the truth. Ronald left without another word. Vanessa packed first. She folded clothes into suitcases without music playing in the background. Without decorating plans. Without conversations about the future. The house felt strangely unfamiliar now. Not because the walls had changed, because the illusion surrounding them had disappeared. She carried another box into the living room. There she noticed the same family photographs Courtney had carefully packed months earlier. They had remained untouched. Vanessa looked at them again. This time, she understood something she had missed before. The house had never been a prize. It had been someone's history. She quietly placed the photographs together on the dining table where Courtney would easily find them after returning. It was a small gesture, perhaps the only one she still knew how to make. Ronald spent most of the week removing furniture he had purchased. Benjamin had already clarified which items belonged to whom. Property acquired personally by Ronald could leave. Fixtures permanently attached to the house would remain. Again, documentation guided every decision. Arguments became unnecessary. During one trip to the garage, Ronald paused beside the maple tree visible through the open door. He remembered Courtney once telling him her father had planted it when she was a little girl. At the time, he had barely listened. Now he wished he had asked more questions. Ownership is rarely built only from legal documents. Sometimes it begins with memories. He had spent years living among memories that never belonged to him. 14 days after the judgment, Benjamin accompanied Courtney back to the property. A licensed property inspector also attended. Everything proceeded quietly. Ronald had already left. Vanessa's car was gone. The locksmith hired this time worked under Courtney's written authorization. He replaced the exterior locks once more, not to exclude the rightful owner, to restore her exclusive possession. Benjamin handed Courtney the final key. It officially belongs back where it started. She accepted it silently. For several moments, she simply stood on the front porch. The same porch where Ronald had once told her to leave. The same front door through which Vanessa had carried designer suitcases. Nothing about the house itself had changed. Only the people inside it. Courtney stepped through the doorway. The living room smelled faintly of fresh paint. Several pieces of furniture were gone. Others remained. The walls looked strangely empty. She walked slowly from room to room. The kitchen, the dining room, the hallway, the staircase. Each space carried echoes of two very different lives. One built patiently over decades, another that had lasted only a few months. She eventually entered the living room again, there, resting carefully on the dining table, exactly as Vanessa had left them, were the framed family photographs. Courtney stopped walking. She gently picked up the oldest one. Her parents smiled back at her beneath the maple tree. The cracked glass had already been replaced. Someone had quietly repaired the frame. She never learned who. Perhaps Ronald? Perhaps Vanessa? Perhaps neither. It no longer mattered. She carried the photograph back to its original place on the living room shelf. Not because she wished to erase everything that had happened. Because the picture belonged there. Some things do not return because courts order them to. They return because they were never truly meant to leave. Benjamin watched from the doorway without interrupting. When Courtney finally turned toward him, she smiled for the first time in months. It was not the smile of someone who had defeated another person. It was the smile of someone who had finally come home. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by restored memories instead of celebration, the judgment felt complete in a way no courtroom order alone could ever accomplish. 6 months passed quietly. The neighborhood settled back into the ordinary rhythm it had known before moving trucks. Legal notices and courtroom hearings became part of everyday conversation. Children still rode bicycles beneath the maple tree. Neighbors still waved while collecting their mail. The house at the end of the street no longer attracted curious glances. Most people had moved on. Courtney Green had moved forward. There was an important difference. Moving on often means pretending something never happened. Moving forward means accepting that it happened without allowing it to define everything that comes afterward. Courtney chose the second path. The house slowly became a home again. Not immediately. Some rooms required repairs, others simply required time. She removed the furniture that no longer felt familiar. She repainted several walls using the same warm colors her mother had once loved. The garden received careful attention every Saturday morning. Fresh flowers returned to the front porch. The maple tree continued growing exactly as it always had, unaffected by the conflict that had unfolded beneath its branches. Nature rarely pauses for human pride. Benjamin Carter visited one afternoon, carrying a single folder. Unlike the thick binders that had filled his office for months, this one contained only a handful of papers. Courtney welcomed him inside. Coffee? I'd appreciate that. They sat at the dining table where countless legal documents had once been reviewed. Benjamin placed the folder between them. The final filings. Courtney opened it. Inside rested the recorded judgment confirming that every required legal step had been completed. The county records reflected the court's decision. The enforcement process had concluded. No outstanding motions remained. Benjamin smiled. Officially, he paused. There is nothing left for the lawyers to do. Courtney looked through the final page before closing the folder. It feels strange. What does spending months preparing for something? She looked around the quiet room. And then one day, realizing it's simply over. Benjamin nodded knowingly. Most people imagine justice as a dramatic ending. It usually isn't. What is it then? He smiled. Paperwork. Courtney laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh Benjamin had heard from her since the case began. I suppose my father would have appreciated that answer. I think he would. Benjamin stood. Before leaving, he looked toward the family photograph, resting once again on the living room shelf. He'd also be proud of how you handled yourself. Courtney lowered her eyes modestly. I wasn't always strong. Benjamin gently corrected her. You weren't always comfortable. He paused. But you were always disciplined. There was a difference. Across the city, Ronald was beginning another chapter of his own life. He had rented a modest apartment, smaller, quieter, far less impressive than the house he had once proudly shown to friends. His career had survived, though not unchanged. Several business relationships had cooled after the litigation, not because clients disliked him, because trust had become more difficult to earn. Ronald gradually stopped talking about the lawsuit. When new acquaintances asked where he lived before, he simply answered, a different part of town. He no longer described the house as his. For the first time in years, he carefully read every contract placed in front of him. Every mortgage document, every lease agreement, every insurance policy. Experience had become an expensive teacher. One evening, he found an old photograph tucked inside a moving box. It showed him and Courtney standing together on the front porch shortly after their wedding. Both were smiling. He studied the picture for a long time. Then he placed it inside a drawer. Not hidden, not displayed, simply kept. Some memories no longer belong in frames. They belong in reflection. Vanessa Brooks had also changed. She accepted a position with another company in a neighboring city. The relationship with Ronald ended quietly several weeks after they moved out. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no final argument, only the gradual realization that a future built upon someone else's broken promises rarely remains stable. Before leaving town, Vanessa mailed one envelope to Courtney. Inside was a handwritten note. It contained no excuses, only a brief acknowledgement. I believed what was convenient instead of asking what was true. I cannot change what happened, but I wanted to acknowledge my part in it. I hope your home brings you peace again. There was no return address. Courtney folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a drawer. Forgiveness, she believed, did not always require another conversation. Sometimes it required only letting bitterness come to a natural end. Margaret Ellis continued tending her roses across the street. One warm autumn afternoon, she noticed Courtney planting new flowers near the front walkway. She crossed the street carrying a small potted lavender plant. My garden produced one extra this year. Courtney smiled. It's beautiful. I thought perhaps your front porch could use it. Courtney accepted the gift. Thank you. Margaret looked around the yard. It feels like home again. Courtney gently pressed fresh soil around the plant. It never stopped being home. She paused. I just had to find my way back." Margaret nodded quietly. Neither woman mentioned the court case. There was no need. Some chapters deserved to remain closed. Months later, Benjamin received a holiday card. The return address immediately caught his attention. Courtney Green. Inside was a simple photograph. The maple tree covered in early winter snow. A wreath hanging on the front door. Warm lights glowing through the front windows. Below the picture, Courtney had written only one sentence. "Thank you for helping the truth find its proper place." Benjamin smiled. He placed the card on the bookshelf beside decades of legal awards. Visitors often complimented the plaques on his office wall. Benjamin privately believed that little holiday card meant far more. Awards recognized successful cases. The card reminded him why those cases mattered. The neighborhood eventually stopped remembering the arguments. Children growing up there would never know the legal battle that had once unfolded behind those walls. The house would simply become another home on another quiet street. That seemed appropriate. After all, homes are not meant to preserve conflict forever. They are meant to shelter peace once conflict has passed. The official records still listed exactly what they had listed from the beginning. The Green Family Trust, Courtney Green. Nothing about those records had changed. Only the people who finally chose to read them, the greatest irony of the entire story, was also its simplest lesson. Ronald did not lose the house on the day the judge ruled against him. He began losing it the moment he believed confidence mattered more than truth. Courtney did not win because she argued more effectively. She prevailed because she respected facts before emotions documentation, before assumptions, and dignity before revenge. When the legal process finally ended, she walked back through her front door exactly as she had walked through every difficult day before it. Quietly, calmly, without humiliating anyone. Because real strength rarely announces itself. It simply remains standing after everything else has fallen away. The stories that stay with us the longest are rarely the loudest ones. They are the quiet moments when someone chooses integrity over impulse patience, over anger, and truth over convenience. Courtney's journey was never about proving that she was stronger than Ronald. It was about refusing to surrender her character while defending what was rightfully hers. The court recognized ownership through documents, but her dignity had been visible long before any judgment was entered. Perhaps that is why stories like this continue to resonate. Many people will never stand before a judge or become part of a legal dispute, but almost everyone will eventually face a moment when doing the right thing feels slower, harder, and far less satisfying than reacting in anger. Those choices often shape our lives more than the conflicts themselves. If this story gave you something to reflect on, we'd love to know where you're watching from and what lessons stayed with you the most. Your thoughts often become part of the conversation that continues long after the video ends. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories, where patience, truth, and justice unfold one careful step at a time, consider liking the video and subscribing so you can join us for the next journey. Every story ends. The values behind it continue.